On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, a cyber attack has hit the ports in Australia. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to the polar vortex that is my office in Campbell University. Yes, it is a bit cold in here today. It seems as if in academia, the heating has not quite caught up to the outside temperature. Got my Hawaiian shirt on, but I also got a pullover on because it's freaking cold in here today. What I want to talk about is an incident that just took place over this past weekend in Australia, where DP World in Australia was hit by a cyber attack. A lot of information coming out about this now, and it really highlights one of the big concerns in global shipping, and that is cyber attacks. Because of the nature of global shipping, the fact that you have to have open networks so that shippers and carriers can get on, track their cargo, input data, they're linked to ships and to networks and to offices all around the world. Cyber attacks are quite frequent. As a matter of fact, one of the worst cyber attacks in history, which we'll talk about, befell Maersk Lines back in 2017. And so this attack that we just saw on DP World in Australia has great deal of significance. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. So here was the initial report back on November 11, 2023. Cyber attack hits Australian ports. This is a Reuters story over on Gcaptain. The Australian government said on Saturday that it was coordinating a response to the cybersecurity incident that forced port operator DP World Australia to suspend operation at ports in several states. Australia is a federal entity divided into states, much like the United States. A DP World Australia spokesman told Reuters on Saturday that the operations at impacted ports were not yet restored. A statement said that the company was working around the clock to restore normal operations safely after the breach was detected late on Friday. Understand, a cybersecurity attack or a cyber attack on a global shipping firm like DP World Ports is significant. You don't have information readily available on what's in each container. And if you do not have that information on the containers, where they're going, where they have to be stowed on a ship, where in the yard they have to go, it's not a matter of just doing this by paper and pen. It's not going to work. You're going to cause the entire system to come crashing down. And a cyber attack, especially on a container shipping firm, is critical. In this case, is the port terminal operator, so that they can't manage anymore. They don't know what containers are where on their terminal. They don't know what containers to stage for a ship. They don't know where to take containers off a ship because they'll lose them in the yard unless they're properly documented. You don't know what containers to take off the yard. You can't log containers coming into a yard. It is just a catastrophe. And this is what befell DP World in Australia. Going on here, follow-up report, this one was on November 12th. Australia says port operator cyber incident is serious. Well, yeah. The Australian government on Sunday described as serious and ongoing a cybersecurity incident that forced port operator DP World Australia to suspend operation at ports in several states since Friday. DP World Australia, which manages nearly half of the goods that flow in and out of the country, said it was looking into possible data breaches as well as testing systems crucial for the resumption of normal operations and regular freight movement. So this is a talk by Claire O'Neill, who's a member of the Australian Parliament. She's Minister for Home Affairs, but she's also the Minister for Cybersecurity. I got to say, a Minister for Cybersecurity, I like a lot. I like much better to have a Minister of Maritime Affairs in our country, but I guess Minister of Cybersecurity is pretty awesome. So this is Claire O'Neill.
In my role as Minister for Cybersecurity, I'm not always able to get up and deliver positive news to the Parliament, but we do have good news today. This afternoon, DP World announced that they are resuming operations at their facilities. Their expectation is that 5,000 containers will leave their ports today. Speaker, the incident at DP World is the latest in a string of cyber attacks which have shaken our country. And this is why this is such a central priority for our government. The DP World incident also, Speaker, shows that some of the critical reforms that our government has put in place in the past 18 months are actually working. Speaker, for many Australians, they're probably not really conscious of the tremendous complexity that's involved in managing a cyber incident of this size.
So let me just add a couple of things here. There have been multiple cyber attacks across the board. When we had COVID during 2020 and onward, there were a string of cyber attacks against shipping firms, against ports, even against the International Maritime Organization. and they could cause catastrophe across the board. Many of them were localized and maintained, but one of the things that we're seeing is repeated attacks against infrastructure, and shipping companies in particular and terminal operators are very susceptible to this.
In the case of DP World, we have a company here that manages 40% of freight movements in and out of our country. The implications for a shutdown, even briefly, on the ports are very widespread, affecting most of the parts of the Australian economy. Speaker, in the instance of this particular cyber attack, we had the National Cybersecurity Coordinator who was on the ground effectively immediately working with the company and across industries to help manage the impacts of this.
So I think it is really important that there be some sort of federal oversight of this. I'm not a big fan of federal government doing everything. Don't get crazy about this, but there has to be coordination across local, state, and federal lines because cybersecurity threats happen that way. And the note there that DP handles 40% of the containers in and out of Australia. Australia is completely dependent on imports and exports and foreign companies largely to operate their shipping for them. Australia has basically gotten rid of a domestic merchant marine, and a lot of the infrastructure in Australian ports are handled by overseas company. DP is Dubai Ports. So it's an UAE company that does this. So there's a lot of vulnerability in countries that have exported out their port management, their port operations, their terminal operations. But it doesn't matter if it's domestic or foreign based. A cyber attack can shut down everything in your port. And even a shutdown for a day has domino effects down the line because freight's not moving that day, bookings aren't done that day, and now everything's going to be pushed back a day. Ships that are coming in are going to be delayed. Ships that are leaving are delayed. It just has a catastrophe across the entire supply chain.
The National Coordination Mechanism, which was triggered for the first time by our government in the context of the Optus attack, has been meeting daily to manage the impacts of this serious incident. And they've been able to also coordinate the Australian Cybersecurity Centre in its engagement with the company and the Australian Federal Police. Now, Speaker, it's really important for the Parliament to understand that none of these mechanisms would have been possible without the reforms of our government and under the former government. But, Speaker, we're not satisfied with clearing what has been an impossibly low bar set by those opposite in cybersecurity. Let's remember, Speaker, that they didn't even have a cybersecurity minister.
So you got to throw a little politics in there. And in this case, the member of parliament is making the point that the previous party in Australia had not appointed a cybersecurity minister. And again, there's a lot of governments that don't take a lot of attention to this until it happens. Fortunately, Australia had the mechanism in place at this time to counter this and deal with it, not really counter it because they still got impacted by it.
I mean, let's pause on that point for a moment. We've dealt with a lot of cyber incidents in the last 18 months. They didn't even have a minister who was clearly in charge of these issues. Now, Speaker, we have implemented enormous reform in the 18 months that we've been in government. We have declared 168 critical infrastructure assets of systems of national significance. We've commenced a very substantial, very important set of national cyber exercises which help us flex and build that muscle. And indeed, Speaker, today the government made 2 announcements about policy reforms that will be contained in the forthcoming National Cybersecurity Strategy. One of those is to introduce mandatory reporting requirements for ransomware attacks around Australia. And the second is to lift the requirements that we place on telecommunications companies to make sure that those telcos that can do so much to affect the cybersecurity of every citizen in our country are meeting their responsibilities. Speaker, we've got a big mess to clean up here, but there's lots of work underway, and I'm proud of the work that's been done so far.
So that was a really interesting talk there by the minister. And one of the things I'll mention that I think is really important is the reporting issue. The reporting of ransomware becomes absolutely crucial so that people can understand what is happening across the board. Because if you don't have the reports, if you don't get a report on what's happening on the ransomware, then you can't really measure it because a lot of ransomware attacks are clandestine. They don't know about them. Companies don't want to report them for fear that people will be stay away from the company because it's being subjected to ransomware attacks. If you look at what DP World put out, here's what they put out. Media statement, update on the incident. They announced that at the company's ports across Australia at 9 a.m. today, 13 November, following successful tests of key systems overnight, they are back up. The company expects that approximately 5,000 containers will move out of 4 Australian terminals today. So obviously a big news. But I was talking about the history of this, and the history of this is really important. This is a story over in Wired, and I'll have it in the show notes for you. The untold story of NotPetya and the most devastating cyber attack in history. This is an August 22, 2018 story that's put out here. And I think it's really an important one. It was a perfect Sunday afternoon in Copenhagen when the world's largest shipping conglomerate began to lose its mind. Headquarters of AP Maersk Moller sits beside the breezy cobblestone Esplanade of Copenhagen Harbor. A ship's master carrying the Danish flag is planted by the building's northeast corner, and 6 stories of blue-tinted windows look out over the water, facing a dock where the Danish royal family parks its yacht. In the building's basement, employees can browse a corporate gift shop stocked with Maersk-branded bags and ties, and even a rare Lego model of a company's gargantuan Triple E, which I have at my house. Container ship, a vessel roughly as large as the Empire State Building. Go on here. That gift shop also houses a technology help center, a single desk manned by IT troubleshooters next to the shop's cashier. And on the afternoon of June 27th, 2017, confused Maersk staffers began to gather at the help desk in 2s and 3s. On the machine screens were messages in red and black letters. Some read, repairing the file systems of C. What happened here was the entire Maersk network was infected with this virus. 574 offices in 130 countries around the globe, all their ships, everything got hit by NotPetya. And what that resulted in was the entire system going black. And all of a sudden, Maersk could not move containers anywhere in the world. What saved them, what literally saved Maersk from having to rebuild an entire system was a series of servers were offline, didn't upload the virus because they were in Lagos, Nigeria, and Lagos had a blackout, and therefore the servers were basically firewalled off. And so Maersk was able to rebuild it. Now, in 2017, we were nowhere near the amount of shipping we were or hauling cargo as we were in the past. If this had happened in 2021, 2022, it would have been devastating. It was estimated this cost Maersk about $10 billion in lost revenue. Fortunately, what this impacted was the ships and cargo that was already loaded to Maersk, either handed over to Maersk and sitting in terminals or onboard ships waiting to move. A lot of people who all of a sudden saw Maersk go dark moved their cargo to other carriers. They went to MSC and other shipping carriers and were able to move it. If this happened when there was at full capacity, when we were moving cargo on everything that was floating, this would have been catastrophic. And when you take out a company like Maersk that represents about 15% of the global shipping fleet in terms of containers, that is massive when it comes to impact. And fortunately, Maersk was able to put it back, but they are still susceptible to this day to this style of attack. And I think cyber attacks are something we need to be aware of in the shipping industry. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Sorry, I'm cold and losing it here in my office. Take a moment, hey, give it a thumbs up, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit that super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon where you become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until the next video, this is Sal calling from a cold Buies Creek, North Carolina.